15 powerful teachings from Jesus that reveal the power of wisdom and can transform your life. Have you ever felt like you're surrounded by too many voices, too much advice, too many paths, but too little direction? Have you ever stopped to think that maybe what you need isn't more information, but more wisdom? Not just any wisdom, but the kind that comes from above, which spans the centuries and remains alive in every word of Jesus. Most people think that wisdom is something reserved only for those who have studied a lot or lived a lot. But Jesus' teachings reveal the opposite, that true wisdom is in the hands of those who have faith, open heart, and willingness to love, forgive, serve, and trust, even when everything seems to be falling apart. And that's exactly what you'll discover here. In this video, we'll explore 15 life-changing teachings of Jesus. And no, these aren't generic phrases to memorize. They're life principles that can change the way you see the world, deal with your struggles, and find peace amidst the chaos. Prepare yourself to hear truths that do not please the ego, but heal the soul. And if you have the courage to apply them, even just one, your life will never be the same. Before diving into this journey, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't hold back on blessings, spread them. Now answer me one thing. Do you want to be wise in the eyes of the world or in the eyes of God? If this question touched you, write here in the comments, "I prefer to be wise in the silence of God than in the noise of the world." This is our pact today, a reminder written with faith to engrave in our hearts and carry with us for the rest of our lives. Divine wisdom that transcends human understanding. There are things we just don't understand. No matter how much we read, study, ask, or try to rationalize, there are situations in life that simply seem illogical. And do you know why? Because there is a wisdom that does not fit into the box of human intellect. It is a wisdom that comes from God, which operates on another frequency, a frequency that demands faith, silence, and humility to be understood. Jesus showed us this all the time. He said things that still make theologians scratch their heads today. Like then, the last shall be first, or blessed are those who mourn. It seems incoherent, right? But that's precisely the beauty of divine wisdom. She does not seek to make sense of the world, but for eternity. We were trained to understand before we obey. But with God, often, it is through obedience that we understand. So when you don't have answers, don't despair. Maybe you're facing something that only wisdom from above can explain. And she rarely shouts. She arrives in the silence of prayer, deep within the soul, when we stop fighting with our minds and surrender with our hearts. Want a practical example? Remember when you prayed and the answer was no? The mind gets frustrated, but faith understands that even a no can be protection. That's where God's wisdom reveals that what seemed like loss was actually deliverance in disguise. A good spiritual exercise is to start the day with this question: Lord, what does your Spirit want to show me today that my eyes cannot yet see? This changes everything, because instead of seeking control, you begin to seek discernment, which is the right arm of wisdom. And what's more, start noticing small signs, a verse that repeats itself, a piece of advice that resonates deeply, a feeling of peace, even without understanding what's coming. All of this is the subtle voice of divine wisdom demonstrating. And you know what's most curious? Sometimes the less you understand, the closer you are to God's will, because He doesn't need your logic. He just needs your yes. The paradox of humility and greatness. If there's one thing Jesus turned upside down, it was the idea of greatness. While the world preaches that the great are at the top, surrounded by applause and prestige, Jesus kneels, picks up a towel, and washes the feet of His disciples. He doesn't just talk about humility, He incarnates humility, and that changes everything. The The true paradox is that in the eyes of God, the more one empties oneself, the fuller of heaven that person becomes. Humility is not a weakness dressed up as virtue. It is controlled strength, greatness disguised as silence. It is knowing that you can be much, but you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Today's culture pushes us towards self-affirmation. Prove your worth, beat the competition, shout louder. But Jesus shows us another way. Service, yes, simplicity, from the place where no one wants to be, because that's where God acts most. And that's where wisdom comes in, knowing that going down isn't defeat, it's preparation. It's the foundation for going up, without losing yourself. Want to see this in practice? Think about the wisest people you know. They're usually the ones who talk little, listen a lot, and have presence. They don't force respect. They emanate respect. That's greatness molded in humility. And believe me, it didn't come from a self-help book, but from experiences lived with God on the ground of life. Humility, in fact, opens doors that arrogance could never break down. It connects, heals, and inspires. And when you decide to walk this path, you begin to realize that life is less about climbing stairs and more about descend steps to reach hearts. It's no wonder Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be greatest must be the servant of all." This isn't a pretty slogan. It's a spiritual key that transforms environments, restores relationships, and attracts the presence of God. So the next time you have the chance to show off, choose a serve. When you are tempted to assert yourself, choose Amar. And when everything in you screams for recognition, remember that true greatness is recognized first in heaven and only then on earth. Discernment to avoid subtle traps. Not every open door is an opportunity. Not every sweet voice comes from God. Sometimes what seems right to human eyes is actually a detour in disguise, and that's where one of the most urgent and underappreciated gifts of our time comes in: discernment. Because evil doesn't always come with horns. Often it comes elegant, smiling, and convincing. Jesus warned us about this firmly. Beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. And it wasn't a random metaphor. It was a real warning about the subtle traps that exist even within seemingly spiritual spaces. Beautiful words can hide rotten intentions, and hasty decisions, even if well-intentioned, can generate pain that lasts for years. Therefore, discerning is much more than judging. It is see beyond the surface, is to perceive the spirit behind the situation. This requires intimacy with God, time in prayer, and courage to say no when everyone says yes. And believe me, this is not learned in a day, but it is cultivated with humility, silence, and active listening to the Holy Spirit. A practical tip: before making any significant decision, be it a new relationship, a job offer, or even a blog post you're about to write, stop and pray. Lord, is this a seed from your heart, or is it bait for my vanity? This simple prayer can save you from troubles that logic could never foresee. Another common trap is praise. Yes, even applause can be a trap. When you start depending on other people's approval to validate what you do, you become easy prey for pride. And where there is pride, discernment becomes blind. Therefore, cultivate the habit of to evaluate the spirit of things, not just the form. Learn to be wary of what seems too good to be true. God doesn't work on impulse, He works in peace. And peace is often a simple silence in the chest that tells you, it's safe here. This is me. When logic fails, faith answers. There are times when nothing makes sense. You look around, analyze the facts, do the math, seek advice, and yet everything seems hopeless. It's like being in a dark alley where not even reason can light a candle. And it's precisely in this place that faith enters the scene, not to explain, but to sustain. Faith is not the enemy of logic, but it knows how far logic reaches. And when that line breaks, faith keeps going. Jesus taught us this with His own life. Remember when He multiplied the loaves? 5 loaves and 2 fish don't feed thousands of people in human mathematics. But when you put yourself in God's hands, the equation changes completely. Many people suffer because they want to experience miracles, but refuse to leave the spreadsheet. The wisdom that comes from above understands that the supernaturality is not calculated, it is trusted. It's like Peter walking on water. While he looked at Jesus, he overcame the impossible. When he looked at the logic of the waves, he sank. Faith begins where control ends. It's what makes you take a step even when you can't see the ground. And here's a practical application. When you're faced with a choice that seems irrational, but you carry peace within you, the peace that comes with prayer, fasting, and confirmation in the Word, maybe it's God calling you to live what only faith can access. The world will call it madness. Those close to you will say you've lost your mind. But faith doesn't need others' permission to work. It only needs one thing: obedience even without explanation. What's more, when you walk by faith, God doesn't just keep promises. He shapes your character in the process. Because trusting when everything is dark is what forges truly strong people. So the next time logic fails you, don't panic. Maybe that's the very moment God is whispering, "Now you're going to let me be God." Wisdom in silence. Silence is uncomfortable. It feels empty, strange, almost unbearable in a world where everyone wants to be heard, where opinion has become currency and noise has become status. But it is precisely in silence that God speaks loudest, because silence is not absence. It is sacred environment for discernment, healing, and wisdom. Jesus was a master at this. Before making important decisions, he would withdraw to pray, alone, in silence. He knew that to hear the Father's voice, it was necessary to silence them all, including herself. And look, this is a profound lesson. Sometimes wisdom is not in responding quickly, but in wait with faith God's right time. In moments of tension, the flesh's desire is to react, to talk too much, to explain, to justify itself. But wisdom in silence knows that there are wars that can only be won in secret, on bended knees, and keep our mouths shut. And not because we are weak, but because we trust in God's justice more than in our ability to argue. Want a practical exercise? Start your day with 5 minutes of complete silence. No cell phone, no noise. Just you and God. At first, it may seem like a waste of time, but little by little you'll realize something precious. Silence heals internal noises you didn't even know existed. And what's more, not all silence is passive. Sometimes it's an act of resistance. It's like saying, "I trust God so much that I don't need to answer now. Time will speak for me." This is the wisdom of mature people, of people who have already understood that God works while we rest in Him. Another important point: avoid the temptation to fill the silence with distractions, social media, TV shows, idle conversations. All of these can be a subtle noise that prevents you from hearing what's important. The Holy Spirit wants to reveal. Sometimes a simple silence can reveal more than 1,000 words spoken on impulse. So the next time you feel the urge to speak up, breathe is ours. Perhaps in this silence, the answer your heart was searching for. Wisdom to face persecutions and trials. Being wise when everything is going well is easy. What's really difficult is staying calm, discerning, and keeping a clean heart. When life gets tough, when they judge you for no reason, when they attack you without you understanding why. But it was precisely in these moments that Jesus shone most brightly, not with shouting or vengeance, but with peace, firmness, and divine wisdom. Jesus was betrayed, persecuted, humiliated, and yet he did not react with anger. He responded with silence, love, and purpose. This isn't passivity. It's wisdom, because he knew that stooping to the level of his accusers was a descent from the place God placed him. And that's a lesson we need to learn. Not every provocation deserves a response, but every test requires a spiritual position. When you go through trials, it's normal to want to give up, scream, defend yourself. But what if I told you that wisdom in these moments is ask less why and more what for? Instead of looking for someone to blame, look for a purpose. Because God doesn't waste pain, He turns every tear into growth if you let Him. Want some practical advice? In times of trial, write down your prayers, your feelings, even your doubts, not to complain but to process with God. Then read the Word. Start with the Psalms. They were written by someone who suffered, was persecuted, fell and rose again, and yet was called a man after God's own heart. The wisdom to endure persecution also involves choosing carefully who you confide in. Not everyone will understand your journey. Some will even use your pain against you. Therefore, seek to surround yourself with people of faith who lift you up and do not sink further with human and undiscerning advice. And remember, gold is tested in fire, and you, being valuable in God's eyes, will be too. But the fire didn't come to destroy you. It came to burn what no longer serves you, to reveal the shine that only appears after resistance. Jesus' wisdom in reversing expectations. Jesus was and remains completely unpredictable. And not in the sense of confusion, but in the sense of strategic wisdom that baffles human logic. He surprised the religious, confounded the powerful, and welcomed the invisible. Where condemnation was expected, He offered forgiveness. Where the people longed for a warrior king, He came riding a donkey. Jesus' wisdom lies in turning the tables without using the rules of the world. While everyone was waiting for a Messiah who would crush the Roman Empire, He came with a quiet revolution of love, faith, and service. And that wasn't weakness. It was heavenly boldness. Because when you know who you are, you don't need to fit into other people's expectations. Jesus teaches us that we are not called to please, but to fulfill an eternal purpose, even if this generates astonishment, rejection, or even scandal. This wisdom of reversing expectations also appears in small actions. Like when He sat at the table with sinners, something unthinkable for the religious people of the time. Or when He prevented the stoning of the adulterous woman with a phrase that has stood for centuries, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." There, He not only saved a life, He exposed hypocrisy with a stroke of pure wisdom and disarmed the system with love and truth. And here's a thought exercise. What do people expect of you that God might be calling you to go against? It could be the career everyone thinks is perfect, but that doesn't bring you peace. It could be a life choice that seems crazy, but resonates strongly in your spirit. Remember, Jesus, He did not come to fulfill human expectations. He came to fulfill the Father's will. In practice, this challenges us to live courageously, to say no to please the heavens, even if it angers the earth. To respond with humility where they expect arrogance, to serve where they expect you to command, because ultimately, living like Jesus means continuing to surprise, not by ego, but by the wisdom that comes from heaven. The example of Jesus, teaching by action. There are people who talk beautifully but live crookedly. With Jesus, it was the opposite. His actions shouted louder than His sermons, and that's what makes His example so powerful. He didn't just teach with words. He embodied the wisdom in every gesture, in every choice, in every attitude that seemed simple, but carried eternal lessons. He didn't say, "Do as I say, but not as I do." He said, "Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." In other words, the teaching didn't come from a pulpit, but from a life. He healed as He walked, taught as He ate, loved while being hurt. This is practical, applied wisdom, and profoundly transformative. And here's a straightforward truth. The world is tired of speeches. What really makes an impact are reactions consistent with what is preached. There's no point in talking about forgiveness if you don't forgive the brother who hurt you. There's no point in quoting verses if your heart still overflows with judgment. Jesus challenges us with the simplicity of one who lived what He taught until the cross. Want a simple exercise? Choose a small action today that aligns with what you've learned from God. It could be silently forgiving someone. It could be serving without expecting applause. It could be giving in to an argument just to maintain peace. These gestures, however small they may seem, have the power to teach more than 1,000 words. And what's more, notice how Jesus dealt with the forgotten, the sick, the cancelled of society. He drew near, he touched, he restored, and never in haste or with spiritual vanity. He knew that lived love is worth more than repeated theology. The wisdom of Jesus lies in this, in reminding us that the world is always watching, and that often the only Bible anyone will ever read is your life. So, walk with purpose. Do with excellence what no one else wants to do. Be a light when everyone else is just smoke. Wisdom to live in the present without anxiety about the future. Our minds love to wander, and almost always they wander toward tomorrow. We worry about what hasn't happened yet, torture ourselves with possibilities, and dwell on fears that haven't even knocked on our door. But Jesus, with his serene and firm wisdom, teaches us, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Living in the present requires faith, because anxiety, deep down, is disguised distrust. It's as if we were saying to God, I don't know if I completely trust what the Lord has prepared. But Jesus calls us to a different stance, to live today with dedication and responsibility without carrying the weight of what has not yet come. It's not about living recklessly or without planning. It's about understanding that planning can be ours, but the direction and the fruits belong to God, and when we truly trust this, the heart slows. The soul finds rest. Now becomes enough. One practice that helps a lot is gratitude. It sounds cliché, but it's not. When you focus on what you already have, instead of worrying about what might be missing, something changes inside you. How about starting your day by writing down 3 simple blessings? A hot cup of coffee, an unexpected hug, a verse that resonated deeply with you. Gratitude anchors the heart in the present. Another tip, set mental boundaries. When your mind starts racing to catastrophic scenarios, take a deep breath and say, Lord, that doesn't exist yet. I choose to trust in your care today. This is a small but powerful prayer. It brings you back to the present, where God is at work. Jesus lived this way. He did not anticipate suffering, even though he knew the cross would come. He lived each moment with intention, presence, and peace, and that is what he invites us to do, because the future is in the hands of the one who's already overcome time and remains in control. The wisdom in forgiveness that frees the soul. Forgiving is not forgetting, nor is it pretending nothing happened. Forgiving is, in fact, an act of emotional and spiritual wisdom, a courageous decision by let go of what hurts before it suffocates who you are. Jesus didn't just talk about forgiveness, he lived forgiveness until his last breath, looking at those who crucified him and saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Is this, or is this not one of the most profound acts of freedom ever recorded in history? While the world awaits revenge, Jesus offers us a more difficult but infinitely more liberating path. Love the offender and leave justice in God's hands, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Holding a grudge is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The soul slowly becomes poisoned. It becomes bitter, defensive, heavy, and when you least expect it, the pain that belonged to others becomes your prison. Have you ever noticed how some people never get over certain stories? It's not for lack of time, it's for lack of decision. If you want to see a silent miracle happen within you, start praying for those who hurt you. You don't need to send a message or rekindle broken ties. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation, but it does require liberation. The first to benefit is you. Your soul becomes light. Your heart gains space for God to act again. And for those who think, but she doesn't deserve it, the answer is direct. You also didn't deserve God's forgiveness, and yet you received it. This is the foundation of the gospel. To forgive is to act like Christ, even when everything in you wants to scream otherwise. In practice, write a letter, which you won't send, to the person who hurt you. Put everything in it, the pain, the anger, the disappointment. Then pray over it and burn or tear it up. It's a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. You'll feel the weight lifting little by little. Forgiveness is a process, yes, but it's also a daily choice. And each time you choose to forgive, it's as if he were saying, "I'd rather be free than be right." And that, my friend, is wisdom that comes from heaven. The wisdom of building life on the rock. Everyone wants stability. Everyone wants peace, security, something firm to lean on when everything else is shaking. But few understand that this stability isn't born from appearances, nor from success, nor from control. Jesus made this clear when he told the parable of the two builders. One built his house on the sand, the other on the rock. The storm came for both of them, but only one remained standing. And the most important detail of this story, the storm came for both. That is, to be wise does not free you from pain, but you prepare to support it. Jesus' wisdom does not promise an absence of problems. It offers foundation so as not to collapse before them. Building on the rock means living based on the word. It means putting what you learn into practice, not just listening and keeping it, but applying it. And this requires consistency. You can't be made of sand on a Monday and expect stability on Saturday. It's day by day in small decisions that the house is built or condemned. Want a practical tip? Establish a Bible reading routine that's feasible for you. It could be a chapter a day, starting with Matthew. Read calmly, take notes, meditate, then pray, asking God to help you live it. It seems simple, but this practice aligns your soul with heaven and strengthens your invisible foundations. And what's more, building on the rock also involves who do you listen to today. With so many spiritual influences, it's easy to follow beautiful but shallow advice. Always evaluate. Does this voice bring me closer to Jesus or further away? Does it encourage me to love, forgive, and serve? If not, it could be sand disguised as truth. What Jesus wants us to do is stop putting on makeup and start working on the foundation. Because in the end, when the rain falls, and it always does, it won't matter how big the house is, but the ground on which it stands. The transformative power of wisdom in love. There's a kind of love you don't learn from movies or songs. It's the love that expects no return, that isn't shaken by rejection, that continues to serve even when ignored. This is the love of Jesus, a love that heals, teaches, transforms, and requires wisdom to be lived in the real world. Love isn't saying, "I love you" easily. It's forgiving when everything inside you wants to give up. It's listening without judging. It's reaching out even when the other person has turned their back. Jesus showed us this in every step. He loved the traitor. He loved those who mocked. He loved to the end because he knew that love was not an emotional reaction, but a spiritual decision. And here's the deeper part. Love is also a divine strategy. It breaks down walls, deconstructs arguments, and touches where words can't reach. How many times has someone changed their life because they were loved instead of corrected? Because they found acceptance instead of condemnation? Wisdom in love understands that not every confrontation requires a fight. Sometimes a gesture of kindness dismantles the other person's armor. A peaceful silence is worth more than 1,000 excuses. A look that conveys compassion speaks louder than theological discourses. Want to practice this? Start at home. In the way you speak to those you live with, in your tone of voice, in your patience with those who think differently. Love doesn't have to be grand, it just needs to be constant and true. And more, don't be fooled into thinking that loving means self-denial. Loving wisely also means knowing how to set limits, saying no when necessary, and not allowing yourself to be manipulated. Jesus loved deeply, but he never failed to do what needed to be done. He balanced grace with truth, compassion with firmness. The love that transforms is not cheesy, it is Maduro. He doesn't pretend everything is okay. He works to make it so. He doesn't run from his wounds. He cares for them. And in the end, this love is the purest reflection of God's wisdom in action. Wisdom to make difficult decisions without fear. Making difficult decisions is like standing at a dark intersection with no sign, people shouting around you, your heart pounding. In these moments, wisdom doesn't shout louder than fear. She whispers, and only those who are sensitive to the voice of God can hear it. Jesus also faced such decisions. The greatest example, Gethsemane. He sweated blood before the approaching cross. But even in the face of pain, he prayed, "Thy will be done." The wisdom here was not to flee from suffering, but to choose the path of obedience, even without human guarantees of relief. Difficult decisions are inevitable. Ending a relationship that doesn't bring you closer to God, saying no to an opportunity that seems good but takes you away from your true self, changing careers, moving to a new city, breaking habits. All of this requires courage. But more than that, it requires spiritual discernment. A practical tip: before making any big decision, step away from the noise. Take a day to fast, pray, and walk in silence. Write down what you feel, list the pros and cons, but most importantly, ask God to show you not the easiest path, but the one most aligned with His purpose for your life. And here's something important: wisdom is not the absence of fear. It's following through with it as long as you have peace of mind. And this peace is different from logic. Sometimes everything seems disorganized on the outside, but inside you there is a deep rest. That's where God is. Also, don't confuse advice with direction. Listen to people who are mature in their faith, yes, but understand, the final decision needs to come from a conviction between you and God. If you depend on other people's opinions, you will be held hostage by their expectations and will never experience the freedom to obey. Making difficult decisions hurts, but running away from them hurts more, because putting off what needs to be done only prolongs the discomfort and delays the blessing. When wisdom reigns, even the most bitter decision becomes fertile soil for growth. Wisdom to discern truth in the midst of confusion. We live in noisy times. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a truth. Voices are everywhere. Social media, news, well-intentioned advice, preachers of all kinds. And amidst it all, the question that echoes in our hearts is, who do I trust? What is actually true? Jesus dealt with this directly. When Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" Jesus didn't engage in a philosophical debate. He had already made it clear, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." That is, the truth, it's not an idea, it's a person. And to discern it, we need a relationship with Him more than arguments. Wisdom in all this chaos is knowing how to filter. It's not believing everything that seems beautiful, spiritual, or popular. It's having the courage to pause and ask, does this carry the character of Christ? Because the truth may be simple, but it will never be shallow. It may be firm, but it will never be arrogant. It may be challenging, but it will never be confusing. Want a practical tip? Before accepting any teaching, reconsider the source's character. Does the person speak with humility or arrogance? Does the content inspire faith, love, and service? Or does it lead to criticism, fear, and division? God's truth always bears fruits of the Spirit even when confronted. Also, seek biblical maturity. Read the Word frequently, not just to memorize verses, but to understand God's heart. The more you know the Bible, the more sensitive you become to recognizing when something, it seems like God, but it is not. And make no mistake, the most dangerous deception is the one that comes with a cloak of religiosity. Spiritual wisdom also knows how to wait. When something confuses you, don't make hasty decisions. God never moves in anxiety. Sometimes only time and prayer reveal what's behind it. Confusion is fertile ground for deception, but it can also be the push for you to seek greater intimacy with the Holy Spirit. Remember, discerning is not suspecting everything. It is being guided by a heart sensitive to what is eternal. And those who walk with Jesus, even in the midst of confusion, are never lost for long. Wisdom that bears eternal fruits. We live surrounded by goals, buying, achieving, growing, showing off. But how many of these achievements actually last? Most fade, rust, are lost, or become memories. And that's where Jesus' wisdom comes in as a loving warning. Invest in what endures. Invest in what has eternal value. True wisdom is not that which only solves today. It is that which builds tomorrow with purpose and eternity with intention. Jesus taught us that a good tree is known by its fruit, not by its branches nor by its leaves, much less by the sound it makes in the wind. It is the fruit that reveals the root. But we're not talking about the fruits of vanity, recognition, or personal success. We're talking about fruits of the Spirit: love, peace, patience, kindness, self-control. These fruits don't go viral on the internet, but they echo in the sky. They are seeds that you plant today, and that someone reaps tomorrow. Sometimes you don't even see it, but the kingdom feels it. Want a practical example? When you choose to forgive instead of holding a grudge, you're planting eternity. When you decide to pray for someone in secret, even without being recognized, you're producing fruit that never rots. When you teach with love, serve with simplicity, or guide someone with wisdom, you are writing invisible chapters of an eternal story. And that doesn't require fame, it requires consistency. God doesn't expect you to do everything, but to do what He called you to do faithfully, even if no one sees it, even if it seems small. Remember the boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish? He didn't perform a miracle, but gave what he had, and in the hands of Jesus, it multiplied. The wisdom that bears eternal fruit is silent, sometimes solitary, but always rewarded in heaven. Because what is done with love, with faith, with obedience is never in vain. Never. After diving into these 15 powerful teachings from Jesus, one thing becomes clear. God's wisdom is not theoretical. It is transformative. It doesn't come to impress, but to transform the way you live, choose, love, and face good and bad days. And the most beautiful thing of all, it is available to all who decide to seek it sincerely. Now the question remains, what are you going to do with what you heard here today? Which of these lessons spoke most strongly to your heart? Which do you need to practice more than reflect on? Wisdom only makes a difference when it leaves the mind and enters into everyday life, in your work, in your relationships, in decisions big and small. And Jesus doesn't want to be just an admired master. He wants to be a present guide in your choices and in your steps. So I challenge you, choose one of the teachings that most touched you, right here in the comments, and share how you intend to apply them in your life from today on. This is not just a comment, it's an act of commitment, a seed of transformation. And if this video touched your heart, like, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications each week. You will receive a new portion of wisdom, faith, and inspiration straight from the source that never runs dry, God's living word. See you in the next video. And until then, wisdom from above guide your steps and establish your paths.